Hello and welcome back to Coach Quant. Today we're going to be looking at a pretty cool puzzle about poisoned wine. A monarch has 8 barrels of wine. One barrel contains poison. If anyone consumes any quantity from the poisoned barrel, they will die precisely 1 month later. Now, there are 3 servants who are willing to risk their lives for the monarch to evaluate the barrels. What is the least number of months required to identify the poisoned barrel? So this is a very interesting question. Essentially, we have um, eight eight barrels of wine, okay, and the point is one of these barrels will kill you in 1 month if you drink it, and this monarch has at his disposal 3 servants who are willing to test the barrels of wine, and we want to find the quickest way uh, for these servants to figure out which barrel is the poisoned wine. And so, if we're just thinking about this problem, um, you know, we might figure out how one would go about doing this, right? So maybe the servants go and test the wine one by one, and so one servant tests wine one, and the other servant tests wine two, the other one tests wine three, and maybe they spend the first month doing that, and then the next servant goes to maybe none of them die, and so we know the first 3 are safe. And then they go and test 4, 5, and 6, and maybe none of them die from those. And then the third month they go and test 7 and 8, and they figure out maybe one of them dies from either 7 or 8, and they figure out what happens. But this problem is very specific, right? Um, they're all willing to risk their lives, and so unfortunately, we don't care. You know, what about the safety of the servants? We sort of just want to quickly figure out which barrel has the poisoned wine in it. And so if we go and test them one by one, it could take up to 3 months, as we just showed here, right? We could take 1 month on these three, 1 month on these three, 1 month on these two. But we want to find if there's a quicker way. And that's why this problem gets very interesting, because it is possible, say, for maybe servant one to test one and two, right? And then maybe actually we have servant one test one, two, and three, and then servant two, right? So servant one does these three. Maybe servant two does these three, and then maybe servant three does the remaining two. In this case, servant one, two, or three will die, and we'll be left with we'll know which three or two the poison mine is in, right? So if servant one dies, we know it's either one, two, or three. Servant two dies, there's either four, five, or six. Servant three dies, it's either seven or eight, right? And so let's say it's four, five, and six. Let's say servant two dies. Then in the following month, we can have servant one test four and servant three test five. And if servant one and three survive, we know the poison one is six. If servant one dies, then we know it's four. And if servant three dies, then we know it's five. And so this only takes 2 months. So it's actually faster than going individually. But the question for us is, can we lower this? Can we get to 1 month? Can we make it so that we can test in just 1 month, we can figure out just in one go which barrel is poisoned? And so the way we're going to do this is by finding a way to store as much data as possible with each of the 3 servants. And so what do I mean by this? Well, I mean, let's say we choose some assortment of bottles. Let's say we give servants one, two, and three, you know, somehow we distribute them barrels 1 through 7. So maybe servant one drinks 1 and 2, and servant two drinks 3, 4, 5, and maybe the third servant drinks 6 and 7, but no one drinks bottle 8. We know that if that occurs and all three servants survive, then bottle 8 was the barrel that was poisoned. And so that's kind of how we're going to store information. So let's say we don't give any of the servants bottle 8. Now, let's say we give only servant one. So our first rule would be that no one gets bottle barrel 8. And then let's go to the second rule. Let's say the second rule, and by the way, I'm going to just draw it under the column of the servants. Let's say we give servant one and only servant one barrel 7. Okay. What this means is if we don't give it to servant two or servant three, that if servant one dies and servant two and servant three survive, uh, we can determine that barrel 7 was the culprit barrel. And we're going to do the same thing for the others. Let's give for barrel 6, we only give it that to servant 2. And for barrel 5, we only give that to servant 3. Okay? So if only servant 2 dies, we know it was barrel 6. If only servant 3 dies, we know it's barrel 5. And then for the remaining, we can store this information in combinations of servants 1 and 2. So let's say we give barrel 4 to both servant 1 and servant 2. Then if only servant 1 or servant 2 dies, we know barrel 4 is the culprit. Likewise, we can do 3, right? If only servant 2 and servant 3 dies, we know barrel 3 is the barrel that's been poisoned. Maybe for 2, we give it to servant 1 and servant 3. And so we're only left with one more barrel, and we can just give it to all 3, right? We can give servant 1, servant 2, and servant 3 all 3 barrels. And so if we do that and all servants die, we know it must be barrel 1 because we're giving only one barrel to all 3 servants, right? We're only giving barrel 1 to all 3 servants. So if they all die, it must be the case that barrel 1 uh, was the poison barrel. So this assortment, right? So if we give servant 1 these barrels and servant 2 these barrels, this assortment will guarantee us, it will guarantee us knowledge of which barrel caused the problem. And so the answer to this is we can do it all in one go. We can figure it out in 1 month. So that is a solution. We have many, many more questions like these on our website, coachquant.com, COACHQUANT.com. I really recommend you go check it out. We have hundreds of questions, completely free access to uh, questions from quant interviews and their solutions and hints. And you can go check out whichever firm you're interested in. Citadel, Jane Street. You can just look at past questions from all those firms on our website. It's completely free. CoachQuant.com. I really recommend you check it out.